The lecture that changed everything. The lecture hall was filled with the murmuring of students from across the galaxy. Beings of all shapes, sizes, and colors sat in the amphitheater, each representing a different species of the United Galactic Federation. The air smelled of various alien scents, and the occasional flicker of bioluminescent skin added an eerie glow to the dimmed room. Some students floated midair, using anti-gravity pods, while others had appendages wrapped around their seats. Despite their vast biological differences, they shared a common interest: understanding war and the species that had mastered it. At the front of the massive hall stood Professor Xilvar, an elder scholar of the Federation's Intergalactic Academy of War Studies. His species, the Vornai, was known for their vast knowledge, but not for their combat prowess. The Vornai had evolved in peace, their long, slender bodies adapted for intellectual pursuits rather than conflict. Xilvar, an expert on intergalactic warfare, adjusted the floating holographic display above him. "Good morning, students," he began, his voice carrying across the hall. "Today, we continue our analysis of the most warlike species of the galaxy. This week, we will be discussing..." A few students leaned forward expectantly. Some whispered to one another, speculating which race would be covered today. The Gurishi, a race of enormous reptilian warlords, perhaps. The Selfari, the telepathic assassins. Or maybe the Kernak, whose battle mechs could level entire cities in minutes. Professor Xilvar cleared his throat. Humans. The room fell silent. Then came the murmurs. Some students chuckled, while others scoffed in disbelief. A large blue-skinned Thalrog at the back of the room let out a deep, vibrating hum, a sound of amusement from his species. A young, four-armed student near the front, Twix, shot his hand up, exasperated. "Humans." Twix repeated, incredulous. "Professor, that has to be a mistake. Humans are not warlike. They didn't even post a single battle score in last year's Federation War Games." Professor Xilvar sighed, already expecting such a reaction. "Twix, if you let me continue with my lecture, you will find out exactly why humans are at the top of this list." Twix crossed his arms, still unconvinced. Xilvar ignored the skepticism and gestured toward the holographic screen, which shifted to display a map of Earth, the human homeworld. The image zoomed in, highlighting vast mountain ranges, deep oceans, and sprawling cities. Humans, the professor continued, evolved on a death world, a planet with the highest biodiversity of any known celestial body, where extinction is a daily occurrence. Earth has predators more terrifying than most apex hunters in the galaxy. A single jungle can house creatures more deadly than an entire warfront. And yet, he paused, letting the room absorb the weight of his words. Humans became the apex predators of their world. A murmur of confusion spread across the hall. Xilvar smirked. "Would you like to know how?" The hologram shifted again, revealing ancient human ancestors, primitive, weak, slow, and fragile compared to the beasts of their planet. At one point, the professor said, there were 5 different species of humans. They fought, competed, and adapted. Only one survived. The one that was smarter. The one that was relentless. The one that would never stop fighting. Twix still looked doubtful. "But Professor, other species have survived dangerous worlds too. That doesn't make them warlike." Xilvar's smirk deepened. "Ah, but humans didn't just survive. They conquered. Every biome on their planet, from frozen tundras to scorching deserts, fell under their dominion. Not because they were the strongest, not because they were the fastest, but because they were the most determined." Another hand shot up. A bird-like Kresheri student tilted her head. "Professor, what do you mean by determined?" Xilvar clasped his hands together. "Humans have 3 traits that make them the most terrifying warriors in the galaxy. 3 traits that even the most advanced war species cannot replicate." A hologram flickered to display a human in battle, a soldier bleeding but still moving forward. "Trait number 1, Xilvar began, is pack bonding." A few students exchanged glances. Pack bonding. That didn't sound like a combat trait. Humans form emotional connections stronger than any known species, the professor explained, and they will fight to the death for those they bond with. Not just their own kind, but other creatures, even inanimate objects. They will endanger themselves to rescue one single lost child. Their entire military strategy is based on unbreakable unit cohesion. The hologram zoomed in on a historical battlefield, showing human soldiers shielding their injured comrades despite overwhelming odds. During the siege of Terra 9, Silvar continued, a single human squad held off an entire Karnak invasion force for 7 hours, simply because their injured leader refused to leave, and they refused to abandon him. Gasps rippled through the hall. Twix narrowed his eyes. That's unusual. Silvar only nodded. It gets worse. The display shifted again. A human was running through gunfire, bleeding, but still charging forward. Trait number 2, combat hormones. A few students tensed. They had heard of these before. When a human is in combat, Silvar said, their body floods itself with chemicals. Adrenaline, cortisol, catecholamines. These substances push their physical abilities beyond what should be biologically possible. They can ignore pain. They can keep fighting despite fatal wounds. A human soldier will keep moving with injuries that would instantly kill other species. Twix's arms uncrossed. He was listening now. The hologram displayed historical footage of human warriors in battle. Some were bleeding, some missing limbs, but they kept fighting. A chemically enhanced soldier is illegal in most parts of the galaxy, Silvar said, but humans, they do it naturally, and it makes them terrifying. The room was silent now. Twix gulped. And the third trait. Silvar turned, eyes gleaming. The most dangerous of them all, he said. The hologram flickered to display a desert marathon on Earth. Humans were running, not to fight, not to escape, but simply because they could. Trait number 3, tenacity. A murmur spread through the room. Humans, Silvar said, are persistence predators. They evolved to chase prey until it died of exhaustion. Even now, in times of peace, they push themselves beyond their limits simply because they refuse to quit. A single human, left alone, will continue fighting long after any other species would have surrendered. The students shifted uneasily. Silvar let the silence hang before delivering the final blow. And if you still don't believe me, he said, look up who the Red Force was in last year's Fleet War Games. The side that always wins, even when outnumbered. A few students hurriedly tapped on their holopads. The results came in. A wave of realization swept the hall. The Red Force, the side that dominated every single war game. It was humans. And it wasn't even their full-time military. It was their reserve fleet. The part-time volunteers. The hall was dead silent. And for the first time, Twix slowly lowered his hand. A predator in peacetime. The lecture hall remained eerily silent, the weight of Professor Silvar's words pressing against the minds of every student. The revelation that the Red Force, the side that consistently outmaneuvered and overpowered their enemies in the Federation's Fleet War Games, was composed of human reservists, part-time soldiers, was nothing short of staggering. Even the most seasoned warriors in the room, those from species bred and engineered for battle, were struggling to process the implications. It wasn't that humans had dominated the war games. It was that they had done so effortlessly, as if the competition had been little more than an afterthought. Twix, his previous arrogance now long gone, swallowed nervously. He had grown up hearing stories of legendary warriors. The Karnak berserkers, the Gurshi warlords, the Velthian shadow assassins. He had always assumed that the apex of warlike species had already been well established. But now, he wasn't so sure. Professor Silvar let the silence linger before continuing. You see, my dear students, humanity's greatest weapon isn't their ships or their technology. It's their mind. He flicked his fingers, and the hologram shifted once more, displaying a timeline of human conflict. It stretched across centuries, filled with battles that dwarfed any single war the Federation had ever fought. The screen zoomed in on a particularly brutal image, the ruins of a planet, still burning, as human soldiers pushed forward through the devastation. "You might be wondering," the professor said, "if humans are so warlike, so capable of destruction, why do they appear to be one of the most welcoming species in the Federation?" The question hung in the air. "Because," Silvar continued, "humans are not just warriors. They are predators. In peacetime." The students shifted uncomfortably. Twix, now fully engaged, hesitated before raising his hand again. This time, there was no arrogance in his tone, only curiosity. "Predators in peacetime? I don't understand." The professor gave a knowing nod. "Let me explain." The holographic display zoomed out, shifting away from war and showing humans in everyday life. A young human mother holding her infant. A group of friends laughing together in a park. An elderly man sitting in quiet contemplation. "They look peaceful, don't they?" Silvar mused. "Non-threatening. Friendly. Even. Weak." A few students nodded hesitantly. "That is their greatest deception." The screen flickered again. The same human mother, now protecting her child during a disaster, running with a broken leg, her face twisted in pain, but refusing to stop. The same group of friends, now banded together to fight off an attacker, their faces alight with fury. The elderly man, now standing between a group of soldiers and a helpless civilian, refusing to move. "You see," Silvar continued, "humans do not need war to sharpen their instincts. They are always ready for it. In peace, they train, they strategize, they prepare. Even their games, their sports, their business negotiations. Everything is a battle to them. A human in peacetime is merely waiting for the next challenge." The image shifted again, showing humans competing in various activities. An athlete running a marathon until they collapsed from exhaustion, refusing to quit. A scientist working through the night, driven by nothing but their own stubbornness. A soldier, discharged from service, still training every single day, as if war could come at any moment. Every other species in this galaxy fights for survival only when necessary, the professor said, his voice growing softer. Humans, they fight for the sake of fighting. A new image flickered into place, a human boxer standing in a ring, bruised and bloodied, but grinning. "Even when there is nothing at stake," Silvar said, "they seek out pain, struggle, and conflict. They push themselves to their absolute limits, simply because they want to know if they can." A deep, unsettling realization was beginning to set in among the students. Twix looked around the room, seeing the same nervous expressions on the faces of his peers. "Professor," Twix said, hesitantly, "this sounds unnatural." Silvar smiled. "That's because it is. There is no other species in the Federation that behaves this way. Most species fight only for self-defense or out of necessity. Humans, they seek out difficulty. They create artificial obstacles just to see if they can overcome them. Even when peace is handed to them, they instinctively prepare for the next war." The screen shifted again. Now it displayed historical footage of an ancient human conflict, a war fought with primitive weapons, long before space travel. Soldiers charged across fields of mud, faces smeared with dirt and exhaustion. Yet they kept running, even as explosions erupted around them. "Let me put it this way," Silvar said. "Humans were fighting each other long before they had even discovered space travel, long before they had unified as a species. No other race in the galaxy has done that. Most species stop fighting once they reach a level of technological advancement that eliminates scarcity and competition. But humans found new reasons to fight, new ways to push themselves further. They invented war before they even had nations." Silence. The Thalrog at the back of the hall, who had been humming in amusement earlier, now sat completely still. Twix, for the first time in his life, was speechless. Zilvar let the weight of his words settle before delivering the final blow. And that, he said, is why humanity scares the entire Federation. The screen flickered again, showing a human soldier standing on the battlefield, exhausted, injured, but still refusing to surrender. You cannot negotiate with a species that refuses to quit, Zilvar continued. You cannot intimidate them. You cannot scare them into submission. Because no matter what you do, no matter how impossible the odds, they will find a way. The final image on the screen was of a lone human standing atop a destroyed battlefield, victorious, not because they were the strongest, but because they were the last ones still standing. Zilvar turned to face the class. And that, he said, voice quiet but firm, is what makes them the most dangerous species in the galaxy. The room was utterly silent. Twix's hand was no longer raised. He wasn't sure he wanted to ask any more questions. The Federation's greatest fear, the silence in the lecture hall, stretched on, heavy and oppressive. The alien students, once dismissive of humanity's martial capabilities, now sat rigid in their seats, eyes locked on the floating holograms. Even the most battle-hardened species in the room, those bred for war and conquest, appeared uneasy. Professor Zilvar let them stew in their discomfort for a few more moments before speaking again. I see that some of you are beginning to grasp the reality of what we are discussing today. His voice was calm, measured, but carried a gravity that settled deep into the bones of those who listened. Twix, who had been so vocal earlier, shifted uncomfortably in his seat. He glanced at the glowing display of battle-worn humans, a species that moments ago he had thought of as docile, unthreatening. Now, they terrified him. The professor gestured, and the hologram flickered again. Now that we understand the individual traits that make humans formidable, let us discuss what happens when those traits are combined and focused into a singular purpose. The screen changed to an expanding fleet of human warships. Unlike the sleek, polished vessels of the Federation, these ships were built for function over form. Their hulls bore the scars of battle, their weapons bristling like the spines of a predator preparing to strike. This, Zilvar said, is the most unsettling truth about humanity. It is not just their resilience, their tenacity, their ability to fight against impossible odds. It is the way in which they do it. The screen zoomed into a recorded battle, one of the few engagements where humanity had clashed with another spacefaring race. A hush fell over the class as the footage played out. The enemy forces, a species known as the Drelak, towering creatures covered in overlapping chitinous plates, had a massive numerical advantage. Their fleets had formed an impenetrable wall, their warships locking into formations designed to crush any opposition with sheer overwhelming firepower. It should have been a slaughter. But the humans, they laughed. The hologram zoomed in on a human commander, his face grimy with sweat and soot, standing amidst the chaos on the bridge of his ship. His crew was frantic, their vessel taking hit after hit from the Drelak's bombardment. The shields were failing. The hull was cracking. The odds were impossible. And yet, the human commander grinned. Then came the counterattack. It wasn't elegant. It wasn't graceful. It wasn't the kind of maneuver that one would find in the carefully rehearsed battle strategies of other Federation species. It was reckless. It was insane. It was human. The human fleet didn't retreat. They didn't hold the line. They charged. Instead of focusing their firepower on weak points, instead of strategically withdrawing, they barreled forward like a storm, ramming into the enemy fleet at full speed. Some of their ships deliberately collided with the enemy, breaching their hulls with suicidal precision. Others detonated their reactors in controlled explosions, turning themselves into weapons. The Drelak panicked. "They don't fight like us," Zilvar narrated, his voice solemn. "They don't fight like any species we've ever encountered." The footage showed Drelak ships breaking formation, their disciplined tactics crumbling in the face of sheer, mindless aggression. They don't fight to win. The camera zoomed in on a human pilot in a damaged starfighter, his oxygen running low, his controls sparking from the damage. His squadron had been wiped out. His ship was failing. There was no way out. He should have ejected. He should have surrendered. Instead, he turned his damaged fighter around and dove straight into the enemy flagship, laughing the whole way down. They fight to destroy. The hologram flickered off. Silence. Not a single student moved. Silvar took a slow, measured breath. It is because of this that humanity is watched so carefully. It is because of this that the Federation fears them more than any known species. Twix finally found his voice, though it was quiet and uncertain. But if they are so dangerous, why do they fight for the Federation? Silvar gave a small smile. Ah, now that is the most fascinating question of all. The screen came to life again, showing the human diplomat standing before a council of alien leaders. You see, the professor continued, humanity, despite its capability for destruction, does not seek conquest. Unlike the Kernak warlords, they do not dream of empires. Unlike the Gurishi, they do not hunger for domination. Unlike the Velthian assassins, they do not revel in death. He gestured at the hologram. They fight not for power, but for their own sense of purpose. They fight for each other. The footage shifted again, showing human volunteers on a distant war-torn planet, helping rebuild homes for a species they had never met. Another clip played, human soldiers carrying wounded civilians to safety, even at the risk of their own lives. And when they join a cause, Silvar's voice dropped to a near whisper, they will see it through to the end. He turned back to the class. You must understand this truth, he said. If humanity sees you as their enemy, they will never stop fighting. They will endure every loss, every hardship, and they will keep coming, long after your own forces have surrendered. A pause. But if they see you as a friend, as one of their own. The screen displayed an image of a human standing side by side with a Thalrog, a Velthian, a Krisheri, an alliance bound not by politics, but by loyalty. If they see you as family, they will fight for you with the same terrifying ferocity. They will stand beside you in the darkest of times. They will defend you, even if it costs them everything. Silvar's eyes swept across the students. That, he said, is why we fear them. He turned, shutting down the hologram with a flick of his fingers. And that, he finished, is why we need them. The class ended. And for the first time in his life, Twix left without a single word. The price of their loyalty. The halls of the United Galactic Federation Academy felt different after that lecture. The usual chatter among students, discussions about strategy, hypothetical war games, and philosophical debates on galactic diplomacy, had quieted. Whispers spread instead, carrying one question among the many species present. Had they ever truly understood what humans were? Twix walked in silence, his forearms folded across his chest. The weight of the professor's words still sat heavy in his mind. He had always viewed humans as friendly, oddly emotional beings. Their strange customs, their habit of forming unbreakable bonds with anything, their need for constant challenge and conflict. He had thought it all just quirks of an otherwise unremarkable species. But now he wasn't sure if the Federation truly understood what they had invited into their ranks. The unspoken fear. Hours later, in the dim glow of a study hall, Twix found himself staring at his holoscreen. He had spent the last 3 hours scouring records, declassified reports, battle footage, strategic analyses of human military engagements. The deeper he dug, the more disturbed he became. He was so focused on the information that he didn't notice someone approaching. "Are you looking at human war records?" Twix turned sharply. Standing beside him was Velshar, a fellow student from the Kernak warrior caste. The Kernak were a species bred for war. Massive, armored beings with skin as thick as starship plating. Their kind had once terrorized entire sectors before reluctantly joining the Federation. Twix hesitated before nodding. I needed to understand something. Velshar let out a low growl, his equivalent of a chuckle. You're not the first. Every few years, someone listens to Professor Xilvar's lecture and starts questioning everything they thought they knew. Twix frowned. So you've done the research too. Velshar's expression darkened. I've done more than research. I've fought beside them. Twix's eyes widened. You? What? Velshar pulled up a holographic file and swiped through a few images before landing on a grainy battlefield recording. He tapped it, and the video began to play. The footage was shaky, the camera struggling to keep up with the chaos. The battlefield was a burning wasteland, the sky thick with smoke. Federation forces were retreating, their lines crumbling under an overwhelming assault. And then, the humans arrived. The camera zoomed in on a squad of human soldiers, moving in tight formation, weapons drawn, their eyes burning with focus. They didn't hesitate. They didn't waver. They charged forward, straight into the enemy ranks, against all logic, against all probability of survival. The enemy, a species known as the Drakari, a race of six-limbed insectoids, outnumbered the humans 10-1. But the humans didn't stop. They fought like demons. One soldier took a plasma bolt to the chest, stumbled, but kept running. Another lost an arm, yet continued firing with the other. Even when their bodies failed, their minds refused to accept defeat. And then came the most horrifying part. They sang, Velshar muttered, his voice grim. Twix's breath caught. What? Velshar pointed at the screen. Listen. Twix adjusted the volume. At first, he thought the audio was distorted, but then he realized. The humans were laughing. No, not just laughing. They were singing. It was a battle song, a rhythmic, almost mocking melody. They were bleeding, they were dying, but they were grinning like maniacs as they charged forward. It sent a chill down Twix's spine. Why they keep fighting? They aren't normal, Velshar said after the video ended. Twix struggled to find words. I don't understand. Why? Why do they fight like that? Why don't they retreat? Velshar leaned against the table, his expression grim. Because retreat isn't in their nature. Because they don't fight for glory or conquest or power. He tapped his armored chest. My people, the Kurnak, we were bred for war. We used to fight for honor, for our legacy, our dominance. He then gestured toward the holoscreen. But humans, they fight for something else entirely. Twix swallowed. What? Velshar's next words sent ice through Twix's veins. They fight because they refuse to lose. Twix stared at him, his mind racing. They don't fight for victory, Velshar continued. They fight because they cannot stand the idea of stopping. It doesn't matter how wounded they are. It doesn't matter how impossible the odds. If you push them, they will push back. If you crush them, they will crawl forward. If you kill them, their allies will remember your face and bring hell to your doorstep. Twix looked back at the still image of the battlefield, of the smiling human soldier covered in blood, still standing. But if they're so dangerous, Twix whispered, why do they stand with us? Why do they fight for the Federation instead of against it? Velshar hesitated before answering. Because we gave them something to protect. Twix blinked. What? Velshar's voice softened. They don't fight for themselves, he said. They fight for each other. For their friends. For their family. He tapped the holoscreen again, this time showing a human soldier carrying a wounded Velthian officer off the battlefield, shielding them from enemy fire. They don't fight because they have to, Velshar murmured. They fight because the moment they decide you are one of theirs, they will burn the entire galaxy down before they let anything happen to you. The most dangerous species, and the most loyal. Twix sat back, his mind spinning. For so long, he had thought of humans as weak, as illogical, as unpredictable. But now he saw the truth. They were the most terrifying force in the galaxy. Not because they were the strongest. Not because they were the smartest. Not even because they refused to die, but because if a human considered you their friend, if they saw you as family, they would never, ever stop fighting for you. The Federation had been wary of humanity for years, keeping close watch on them, fearing their capacity for war. But what they should have feared most was what would happen if humanity ever lost something they truly cared about. Because if that day ever came, the galaxy would learn what it meant when a human whispered their most chilling words. "We're not stopping. Not until it's over." Twix sat in silence. Velshar shut off the screen and stood. "You get it now, don't you?" Twix slowly nodded. Velshar gave him one last look before turning to leave. And in that moment, Twix realized something far more unsettling than the professor's lecture. The Federation wasn't afraid of humans because of what they could do in war. The Federation was afraid of humans because they still didn't know what would happen if they ever truly went to war.